What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of A Dietitian's Take. Joey Gast here, registered dietitian and online fitness coach. Hope you guys are having a great morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you're listening or watching this. If you are listening, we are going to start uploading our podcast to our YouTube channel. So this will be the first one that will be officially uploaded on there. So if you're listening and you would rather watch and visually see, I know some people like to listen, in the background. Some people like to sit and watch and listen at the same time. Totally up to you. You can go ahead and head to YouTube and watch that. So, but it's officially April. Well, first off, back up. Let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. Today, I really wanted to talk about crash dieting and is it good, or what even is crash dieting? What are some issues with crash dieting? If you've tried crash dieting, or I would say extreme dieting, or really trying to put the pedal to the metal these past few months, this is going to be an episode for you, especially if you haven't seen progress. So April has officially started, and summer is right around the corner, really just a couple of months away, which is crazy. And I've had multiple conversations with people recently about their weight loss goals that they had set back in January. Maybe they wanted to lose 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, maybe even 30 pounds. Some of these goals, maybe not necessarily by summer, but a lot of them by, or at least getting close to that goal by the summertime. That way they're feeling more confident, able to wear the shorts in the summer. They're able to put on a bikini or a bathing suit and just feel good in their own skin. But a lot of them haven't gotten anywhere close to achieving those goals that they had set, and some of them haven't made any progress at all. So, I was thinking about the situation that they're in, and that you might be in, listening as well. You're 3 months in to 2023 with no progress, and you feel like the clock is kind of ticking now, right? Like summer's a couple of months away. First week of April, at least in Ohio, it's been looks like it's going to be pretty-ish warm, like 50s and 60s and a little sunny, for most of the week. So we're kind of getting that warm-ish weather coming in, and you might feel the pressure like, oh, shoot, I don't have that much time. I'm going to have to make up for lost time since I didn't really make much progress the past few months. Now I need to really, double down, push the pedal to the metal. Maybe, bring my calories even lower than what they were before to try to make up for lost time, right? So you might be thinking of a diet like that, which, depending on how low you go, could be thought of as an extreme diet or a quote-unquote crash diet. There's a lot of perceived positives of crash diets, right? You are able to lose weight super fast. You don't have to diet for as long. Instead of, being in a diet, quote unquote, or having, the goal of weight loss for 8 weeks, let me just, bring my calories even lower and try to lose the same amount of fat in 4 weeks instead. It sounds like a win-win when you just think of it simply in those terms, right? But it doesn't exactly work out that way, especially in the real world. So first, with this discussion of crash diets, we have to think about what even is considered a crash diet in the first place. Like you hear this term all the time, crash dieting. What even is a crash diet? Because you might think a crash diet is something, and I might consider crash dieting something else. And someone else, on the street, or your family member or friend might have their kind of own subjective definition of crash dieting, and it might look different than what I'm describing. So crash dieting, in my opinion, is when you are losing or aiming to lose 2% or more of your body weight per week. So for reference, the sustainable rate of weight loss that I recommend to all of my clients, that is, pretty established, is 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. So if you're somebody who you weigh 200 pounds, the crash diet realm would be if you're aiming to lose around 4 pounds per week. And then the sustainable diet realm would be if you're aiming to lose around 1 to 2 pounds per week. So like I said, that's if you are a 200-pound individual. Now, obviously, like your body fat percentage plays a little bit of a role in that too, but kind of blanket statement, general recommendation. If you're 200 pounds, 1 to 2 pounds per week, that realm seems to be a little bit more sustainable. If you're aiming for like 4 pounds per week or especially more, that would be kind of considered a crash diet under this definition. And then even if you're aiming for like 2.5 pounds per week or 3 pounds per week, right, that's in the middle of those two ranges, then you're kind of pushing it and you're getting close to that crash diet realm. Probably getting, maybe you don't consider it a crash diet, but it's definitely an unsustainable diet for a lot of people. And just some other numbers too, just for reference, if you are 150 pounds, crash diet realm would be losing 3 pounds per week or more. If you're 150 pounds, the sustainable diet would be between 0.75 and 1.5 pounds per week. And that's like on average over a long period of time, not necessarily like one given week, because we can see a lot of water weight fluctuations and things that skew your kind of weight loss for a 7-day period. But if we're looking at your average weight over a span of 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, that's kind of the rate we're looking at. And also think about this. If you are losing around 1 pound of fat per week on average, so keep in mind, this is body fat. This isn't necessarily you losing a pound on the scale overnight or over a few days. There's some water weight fluctuations that deal with that. But if you're losing a pound of fat on average per week, then you are going to be in about a 500 calorie deficit per day, which is a pretty big deficit. Like it's not huge, it's not extreme, but you're going to feel it probably. If you're in a 500 calorie deficit, for most people, you are going to feel maybe a little bit hungrier, and you're going to notice that you're eating a little bit less calories overall, especially if you're experienced. So that's about 1 pound per week. So if you're at that 4 pound per week mark that you're losing of actual body fat, that means you're in a 2,000 calorie deficit per day, not even per week. That's per day, which if you're somebody who you burn 2,500 calories a day, you're eating only 500 calories on that day. If you're somebody who burns 3,000 calories per day, you're only eating 1,000 calories per day. So that's a pretty extreme deficit. So just wanted to kind of go over those numbers so you had an idea of what kind of constitutes as crash dieting in this podcast, but then also just my opinion in general. And I assume a lot of registered dietitians and fitness coaches would agree with those numbers for the most part. So like I said before, crash dieting has this appeal because you can theoretically lose more fat in the same amount of time versus a sustainable diet, right? Like you can lose 12 pounds in 3 weeks versus losing 12 pounds in 6 to 12 weeks. So it sounds great, right? Like I can get this weight loss over with faster. But there are some issues with this, and it doesn't work out like this in the real world for a few reasons, and I'm going to go over those. So number one is when we go into a calorie deficit and we try to lose body fat, we have some short-term what's called metabolic adaptation that takes place. So what this basically means is what happens is as we eat less calories, our body, or we in general, will burn a little bit less calories, right? We have less fuel coming in, so our body has less fuel to burn up. So it kind of slows down different systems or different things in the mind and in the body to burn a little bit less calories. It's kind of like a survival mechanism. If you have less fuel coming in, your body's going to try to be more efficient and not use up as much. And this is mainly due to a decrease in what's called NEAT and reduced exercise output. So number one, what is NEAT? It stands for NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is a fancy term for the calories that we burn doing kind of more subconscious tasks or things that we don't even realize we're doing that burn calories. So like, for example, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm moving my hands as I'm talking. That would be considered NEAT, right? Like I'm not consciously thinking, let me move my hands around, but I'm just doing it. And if I were in a severe calorie deficit, pushing that crash diet realm, I would probably be sitting here talking, not moving my hands at all, or not moving my hands very much compared to what I am now, because I have overall less fuel coming in. So my body is going to kind of downregulate and try to slow down these things, especially things like fidgeting, moving your hands around, NEAT, like I described, the subconscious activities that we're not really thinking about. So that is one example of NEAT. Another example of NEAT is maybe you just start taking the elevator a little bit more than the stairs. And it's not like a conscious decision you make, but you just end up making it. Another thing is if you're somebody who like fidgets and taps your feet a lot, you might tap your feet less when you're eating lower calories. Even talking, like if you're somebody in social settings who, like, if you decrease your calories, you could be really affected by that, to where you just talk less. Like you're in a group of people and you just kind of sit in the corner, stand in the corner, and maybe you listen, you're engaged mentally in the conversation, but like verbally and physically, you just say a little bit less because your overall energy is just a little bit lower. So those are some examples of needs. And there are other examples too that I didn't mention. The biggest ones would be like fidgeting, tapping your feet, the speed that you talk and how much you talk. Those are kind of the big ones that get affected. But also other things too, like even like sitting on the couch and watching TV versus like reading and, reading a book. Reading a book takes more engagement in your mind and burns more calories in your mind than just sitting and kind of passively watching TV. So you might choose that route a little bit more because you're just physically tired, which means you're a little bit mentally tired. You have less calories coming in. And then you might read less and do something like that. So those are ways NEAT can decrease. And this can be pretty substantial in a lot of people. Like there have been studies, and I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I believe up to like 400 calorie differences in NEAT just from either decreasing your calories, but then also even increasing your calories and NEAT going up in the other direction. So that's one way we get these kind of short-term metabolic adaptations of slowing down how many calories we burn is through a decrease in NEAT. But then also through exercise was the other one I mentioned. So kind of the simple thing with exercise is if we have less calories that we're eating, we're probably not going to be able to perform as well in the gym. We're not going to have as much fuel, not going to have as much carbohydrate or what's called glycogen stored in our muscles to help fuel that performance. So our gym performance will probably go down, which overall, if our gym performance goes down, our overall calorie burn will go down a little bit. It's not going to be like a crazy amount, but it does contribute a little. And then if our performance goes down, then what we have to recover from goes down too, right? Like if you're only lifting 90 pounds on squats versus 100 pounds, that's less weight and less stimulus and less workload that your body has to recover from. So the fuel and the resources you need for recovery are going to be a little bit less, which overall burns a little bit less calories over the next couple of days too, as your body's recovering. So that's another way as well. And this is why, like, even if you aim for a 500 calorie deficit, like you do the complete math, you're like, okay, according to this equation, I burn 2,500 calories a day and I'm going to bring my calories to 2,000. That 500 calorie deficit probably will be, for, depending on the person, probably actually be maybe like a 400 calorie deficit, because your body might adjust 100 calories for decreasing NEAT a little bit, decreasing gym performance a little bit. So even with like a sustainable calorie deficit of maybe 500, we see a little bit of that short-term metabolic adaptation. But especially if we drop our calories too significantly and drop down to like 1,000 calories a day, and we're in that kind of crash diet zone, then we see an even bigger decrease in NEAT and exercise performance too. So that's one huge downfall, obviously, of crash dieting. Number two is that our hunger will obviously skyrocket. If we are eating less calories in a larger calorie deficit, our hunger signals are going to go through the roof. They're going to increase more significantly to try to get us to eat more food to make up for that deficit. Like if you are eating in a 500 calorie deficit, so aiming for about 1 pound per week, and if we were to like measure the levels of different hunger hormones in the body, ghrelin, another one, GLP-1, if we measure those types of things, your hunger hormones those levels will be a little bit higher if you're in a 1,000 calorie deficit versus a 500 calorie deficit, because you're eating less fuel and your body kind of senses that you're in a larger deficit. So let me make this person hungry so they can eat up that deficit, because your body doesn't like to starve. So you're going to be in a larger deficit, so your hunger is going to be higher. It's also going to make, you might diet for less time if you're able to stick with it, with that severe deficit. but you're going to be more miserable during that process versus that process being bearable and like feel like you can do it every day. Like if you're in an extreme deficit and you're eating 1,000 calories each day, you're probably going to wake up every single day like, oh, geez, like I only have 1,000 calories left, and you're going to have your breakfast and it's going to be 400 or 500 calories. And you're like, wow, like I only have 500 calories left for the whole entire day. And mentally, it's going to be exhausting just dealing with that every single day versus if you're in a more modest calorie deficit, a 500 calorie deficit, and you're like, okay, I eat my breakfast, about 400 calories, and I still have 1,500 calories left throughout the day or so. And it's going to mentally be less draining. And also, it's going to provide you with more flexibility in life. Like imagine trying to like enjoy a Friday night out with friends, maybe grab some pizza, if you're eating 1,000 calories a day. Like even if you try to be modest and like, okay, I'm only going to have one slice of pizza or maybe even 2 slices of pizza, depending on how big those slices are, you might be eating up more than half of your calories in just those couple slices of pizza. And that's just not a way to live. It's not a way to lose weight, to make it sustainable. You're going to have to cut all of those social events pretty much out of your life entirely for that dieting period. And unless you're like a hermit that lives under a rock by yourself, you don't talk to anybody, you don't socialize at all, you're probably not going to be able to stick with that. And it's going to make you kind of resent the diet and resent the process because you're having to give up so much of your life just to stick with this. So that's kind of issue number 2 is hunger is going to skyrocket and it's not flexible enough for like actual day-to-day life unless you live a very, very, very secluded life. Number 3 issue with crash dieting is you will lose less fat per pound that you lose. Like if you lose 5 pounds total and you are eating in an extreme calorie deficit, and maybe let's say you lose the 5 pounds in, let's say 10 days, you lose the 5 pounds versus losing 5 pounds over a span of like 4 to maybe 5 weeks, that 5 pound weight loss that you lose in those 10 days, a lot of it is probably going to be just water weight loss, and a lot of it is going to be muscle compared to if you were to lose that over a span of 4 weeks or 5 weeks, right? The slower you do it, the more likely all or most of the weight you lose is going to be actual fat mass versus mass or weight from those other areas. And like, when we set out for a weight loss goal, nobody really cares about what the number on the scale really says. Like even you yourself, you might have some goals in your head, but you're basing those scale weight goals off of what you think your body will look like and feel like at that weight. You kind of like have this idea of what that will probably feel or look like. But you're not necessarily like stuck on that specific number in your head for the most part. So with that, like if I told you I could drop your weight by 10 pounds, but your body composition wouldn't look any different, you probably wouldn't be happy. Versus if you could, obviously lose 10 pounds, lose it the right way, and your body composition look totally different, or even lose 5 pounds, right? You might come into, our program. Sometimes clients come in and they're like, I want to lose 30 pounds. And we help them lose 20 pounds sustainably the right way, where most of it, if not all of it, is fat mass. And they're like, I think I'm good here. Like, I don't think I really want to or need to lose the other 10 pounds. So like when you do it the right way and do it slower, you lose a higher percentage of fat for every pound you lose. And then a lot of times you end up not having to actually even lose as much weight as what you actually think to kind of see the body changes that you wanted all along. And then also you'll be able to maintain more muscle, like I said, because you'll be losing mostly fat. So you're going to achieve that more defined and toned look that you most likely want versus just losing weight, like numbers on the scale, but then looking at your body and maybe it's a little bit smaller, but it doesn't have that defined and toned look that you wanted in the first place. So that's issue number 3. Issue number 4 is when you crash diet and you lose weight super quickly, you are way less likely to keep it off. Like I said, hunger is higher. We kind of touched on that in point number 2. So you're more likely to rebound, right? Like if your hunger is skyrocketed after you lost this 15 pounds, And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I hit my 15-pound mark. I'm done. I'm done with my weight loss. Time to go back to my regular diet. Your hunger is going to be so high. You're probably going to overcompensate and eat more than what you were even eating before the diet and gain a lot of that back. And also, when you crash diet, we kind of touched on this in the last point, you're going to lose more muscle. And there's actually research behind when you lose more muscle during the weight loss process, you're also more likely to gain that weight back too. It's kind of new-ish of a theory or of an idea, but it's like your body has kind of like a muscle mass set point. And when you lose muscle, your body actually ramps up hunger too to gain that muscle back. The thing is, muscle takes longer to gain than it does to gain body fat. So when our hunger signals are increased to try to get us to eat more to build that muscle back, if we end up falling victim to that and actually eating more, then the weight we gain back is going to be mostly fat mass and not as much muscle as what our body actually wants. So we'll actually end up overeating for a longer period of time afterwards if we lose more muscle. So that's another really big downside of crash dieting as well. And also, if you lose weight super quickly, like let's say you lose a significant amount of weight in 10 weeks, it's really not that long of a time for all of these behaviors that you tried to adopt or implement over this past 10 weeks. It's not enough time for those to really become like ingrained habits in your life. And then it's going to make it even harder to stick to after, because if you lose that weight in those short 10 weeks, once you reach that end goal, your motivation is probably going to like go down. Your motivation, your inspiration, your driving force isn't really there anymore because you've quote unquote reached your end goal. So when you reach your end goal and you don't have this like outside thing to shoot for, and now you still have to implement discipline to keep those behaviors and habits, it's going to be extremely hard to keep that up. To avoid going completely back to your old habits and gaining the weight back. Versus if you do it for, let's say, 6 months instead of 10 weeks, you lose the same amount of weight. That gives you 6 months for all of these habits that or behaviors that you feel like you have to use a lot of discipline for. After month 4, 5, and 6, hopefully, they become like natural habits in your life that you don't have to really think twice about, and they become more autopilot. So then when you reach that end goal and you don't have that motivation or inspiration of losing that 20 pounds or whatever anymore, all of those behaviors are actual habits of yours by this time. So you don't have to implement as much discipline to keep them going. So that's another huge benefit of losing weight slower, or a huge downfall of losing weight too quickly, is you don't give yourself enough time to actually make this a lifestyle. And if you don't make it a lifestyle and it's just something you do for a short period of time to achieve an end result, then once you reach that end result, there's nothing that like drives you to keep those habits up. So another big downside. And number 5 is that all of these things that I mentioned, they don't matter if you can't even stick to the crash diet in the first place, right? All of these things I went over, list 1 through 4, are things that you have to worry about if you have the whatever discipline or whatever you want to call it to actually follow through with the crash diet. But point number 5 when it comes to attempting crash diets is most people can't even stick to them in the first place. There was a recent study that came out that showed no differences in fat loss in 8 weeks when people implemented an extreme diet group or they were in a more modest calorie deficit group. So what this study looked like is one was an extreme deficit, eating around 1,200 calories a day. Another group, they actually started out with no deficit, I believe it was, and then every week they kind of gradually increased the deficit. But for the first like 4 to 6 weeks in that second group, they were in a like easy, modest calorie deficit, taking weight loss slow. And it wasn't until weeks like 7 and 8 towards the very end where their deficit got larger, where the first group, they were in that large calorie deficit for the whole 8 weeks. So if we like put these people in like a lab and gave them food through like a little hole on the door or something like they see in jail cells where they had no access to other foods, the extreme diet group should see more weight loss, right? Because they were in a larger calorie deficit for that 8-week period on average versus the other group who started off with pretty much no deficit and did like a modest deficit for most of the study and then a larger deficit at the end. But the reason why there were no differences, though, in the fat loss, even though the first group theoretically should have lost way more fat, is because people in the extreme group couldn't stick to it. So you might think that you have this discipline to push things faster along, but these people didn't in this study. And these were people who were recruited for the study. They had support from researchers. They were logging their food intake. They had to report to a sports nutritionist. And when you're in a research study, that's probably a lot of pressure, right, to follow through too, because like the results on the study are reflective of how well you're actually able to follow the protocol they give you. But they weren't able to stick with it, giving all of this support and help that they had and all these things. But you, and I'm going to be real with you here, you think that you can stick to a crash diet or a large calorie deficit on your own. Like a lot of you listening to this have probably tried this extreme dieting process on your own and have probably tried it for years and years and years over and over and over. So 99 times out of 100, this extreme approach is going to be unsuccessful. So why do you keep going back to it? Like I've had so many conversations with, women waiting to join our program or talking about it, or who have joined our program, who have done this for years and years, cycles and cycles. And, they've lost weight, then they rebounded back, lost weight, rebounded back. And now they're in the same position when they started, or maybe they're even worse. Maybe they've even gained weight over this time period, despite all of their attempts of dieting and losing weight. And like, this is why the clients that we work with, we make sure we're doing things at a rate to keep them motivated. So we make sure we do things, to where we're seeing actual progress week to week, because that's very important to obviously stay motivated and see those changes. But we also don't do it too fast to set them up for failure. Because you don't get bonus points for losing the weight faster. The only quote unquote bonus points that you get are from being hungrier, being more irritable, missing out on social events, losing muscle mass, workouts not being as enjoyable because you're so tired. You're gaining more weight back after. You're probably, like I said, more irritable and not in a good mood for like the people around you. And you're also likely wasting your time every time you try a crash diet, because 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, whatever statistic you want to put on this, you are not able to stick with it anyway. So you're trying this crash diet for 3 months, not losing anything, where you could have taken a more sustainable, slower approach with guidance from someone. That's always helps too. But you could have taken this slower approach and lose, maybe 10 to 12 pounds during that time period and be way farther ahead than where you are now. So hopefully this podcast, this episode, this video was helpful, just kind of highlighting all of the downsides of crash dieting. And like I said, this is why we're so against it and why we don't put our clients through these crash diets, is because if you're able to stick with it, you deal with all of these negative symptoms and adaptations that are not enjoyable, that set you up for rebound, set you up for failure. But then also, you can't stick to it anyway, or most people can't. So there's no point in even attempting something that has all these negative side effects if you're able to do it, while also at the same time being almost impossible to do anyway. So hopefully this was helpful. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Share it on your Instagram stories. Leave us a 5-star review rating. Appreciate you all. Hope you guys have an amazing rest of your week, and I will see you guys in the next one.